And we are now recording. So welcome to today's Wednesday webinar. I'm Shannon Dill. I'm with University of Maryland Extension. We're happy to host these on the second and fourth Wednesday of each month at the noon hour. And they're all recorded. So we have the blue link here. If you go to that, you can see our upcoming webinars as well as some of our archived ones. We have those all posted on our YouTube channel. Following this session, we'll be sending you the slide set as well as the recording. So we have three webinars left for the year, and you can see those listed here, and we are working on planning those for 2022. So we're going to stay with our second and fourth Wednesday and get some great topics for you. Before I turn it over to Maria and Jesse, I just like to say a big shout out to our sponsors of the Women in Ag program, as well as our collaborators. So thank you to everybody that kind of works it within this network to get some information out. So if you have questions, please use the chat pod. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maria and Jesse.
Thank you, Shannon. I think I'm going to kick us off today and transition over to Maria as we move along. But my name is Jesse Ketterman. I'm with University of Maryland Extension. I'm a family and consumer science educator in the western part of Maryland, with my main office being in Allegheny County. And I am, my focus is financial education and health insurance education. And I'm also an accredited financial counselor, and I've done a lot of work with my friend Maria around resiliency and farm stress resiliency and finance resiliency. And so with that, I'll let Maria introduce herself.
Thanks, Jesse. So I'm Maria Pepitas, and I work with the University of Delaware Cooperative Extension, and ditto kind of what he says, except I work in Delaware. So I kind of cover all of Delaware, doing financial management, health insurance, literacy, and as he said, working a lot around farm stress issues, especially around money management. And yeah, and so we're really glad to be here today to talk a little bit about managing your finances resiliently. And back to you, Jesse.
So let's dive into what exactly we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about and review the signs of stress and typical financial stressors. We're going to define resiliency and resiliency thinking and characteristics that resilient individuals and family have and can strengthen. And then we're going to review a tool for addressing financial challenges. And so, we're going to, again, start with this concept of stress and then kind of move it into financial stress and then into resiliency and then this tool that we have. So that's going to be our plan for today. And so it kicks us off into what are some of these things that cause stress, right? I'm sure that as I go through this list, you're going to relate to a lot of those things and may have either experienced them yourself or have seen someone else experiencing them. So we'll just work through from top left and around. And stress can come from having low or no income, right? And that can be for a variety of reasons. You could be unemployed. You could, if you're a farmer, had a bad year with your crop and didn't have as much income. So there's a lot of different ways that you may end up with low or no income. You may have more bills than you anticipated, right? There's lots of things that could cause low and no income. You could carry large debt loads. So if you purchase new equipment and or have a lot of loans for your land, that could be a stressor there as well. We all deal with balancing our wants and needs, and one of the interesting things that you do as a financial educator is you speak to audiences ranging from little kids all the way up to seniors. And, that conversation of wants and needs occurs with all of those audiences, right? So we have to make tough decisions and make sure that we're balancing that wants and needs aspect. Disagreement with family members and for farmers, again, that can be in two areas. It can be in your personal life and it can also be in the farm or the farm operations piece. So, something that farmers have a lot in common with small business owners in the sense of, again, there's a lot of stress that goes along with having your farm and managing your farm, and also your personal life, because so much of that can be intertwined. Uncertainty of markets and regulations that govern those markets can create stress. You know, sometimes we have unexpected expenses or unexpected things happen to us, such as COVID. And then we have also, you know, raising children, right? That can present its own set of challenges and stressors. And then healthcare, you know, especially as you age, you start thinking more about healthcare and in the situations that you may need to deal with. I just turned 50, so you know, my perspective on where I'm at in life kind of has changed a little bit just by the nature of my age, and we know that a lot of farmers are, you know, a little bit older than that, right? If you look at the average age of farmers, I think it's around mid-50s, right? So you're thinking about those healthcare and insurance type issues. And so let's talk about what stress is. And I'm going to give you a definition of stress. I'm sure that we all have our own kind of definition, but I do want to just kind of keep us moving forward a little bit. You know, stress is defined as a need or a demand people confront that is perceived as burdensome or threatening and can lead to physical and mental health problems. And I want to emphasize that can lead to, right? Because a lot of times when we think about stress, we think about all the negative aspects of stress. And again, prolonged stress can definitely lead to those physical and mental health problems. But some stress at times is good. And they call that eustress, right? And you think about, you know, when you plan to get married, right? There's a stress that goes along with getting married and having a wedding and all the things that go along with it, and the planning and who's going to be invited and how much money it's going to cost, and just the fact of making that lifelong commitment to someone. All of those things are stress, but they can be good stress, and they're temporary things, right? Once you get married, then hopefully everything's happy and you don't have that stress anymore, right? So not all stress is bad. And then again, that prolonged stress, we kind of talk about that as distress, right? When things are overwhelming. And we're going to talk about some of the things that happen to you when you experience stress over a long period of time. And so now we're looking at that stress, right? What does stress look like? And we kind of have 4 areas that we're talking about here. We're talking about stress can be seen or felt in a physical or mental aspect. And some of those physical signs of stress could be headaches, backaches, could result in eating problems, right? Sometimes you just don't feel like eating when you're under a lot of stress, or you eat too much. Sleeping, you could have trouble sleeping, or you kind of could be on that depressed side and you sleep too long, right? You don't feel like getting out of bed. Shortness of breath, aching muscles, blood pressure definitely would be one of those things. Feeling exhausted, you know, those are all examples of that physical and mental stress. And then you also have emotional and behavioral components. And so I mentioned that depression, that's more of an emotional behavior response. You could have anger, you know, changes in behavior that you get angry real easily, or you can have a lot of anxiety. Be easily irritated. You could start to develop passive aggressive behaviors. You know, could be increased drinking or increased smoking, or even changes in habits. You know, those are all emotional and behavioral signs. And then you also have, Maria talked about spending too much money there. So Maria, if you see something in the chat, feel free to point it out. I'm not really watching that too much. You know, under social relational, one of the things farmers have to deal with and have to be really in tune with is the isolation piece, right? When you're working on a farm, especially on a smaller operation, you might be the only one working, or you're by yourself all day long. I know I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and it was he was on his combine, and it was just him, and he was on there for 6 hours, right? And until he needed to get off. And so when you're by yourself, that isolation itself can increase your stress and can make you feel stress and make you want to kind of stay to yourself as well. You can have signs of lack of communication with others. You can have increased conflicts with others. You could start to see those social and relational through your marriage or through how you respond to the behavior of your kids. You see changes in those kind of things, and not necessarily for the positive. And then you have that fourth component there, environmental. And when you're talking about environmental, you can see that at times with the care of the fields, which is what we have in that picture in the bottom right-hand corner. You can see it with equipment not being cared for and maintained, right? If you have livestock, it could be the livestock is being neglected. It can also be seen in an individual's appearance, right? If you see someone that dresses one way all the time, and then next thing you see is they're very disheveled. They're maybe they always had their shirt tucked in, and now they're walking around with their shirt untucked and it's always wrinkled. Those may be an environmental sign. And then you can think of it from a meeting perspective, where all of a sudden people that would have typically been to a meeting are no longer at a meeting. That could be another example. So those are all signs that someone is experiencing stress. Now, we're talking about that larger concept of stress, not specifically about finance, but financial stress can be seen in all those things, because again, when your body feels that stress, it's not sorting out whether it's financial stress or relational stress or whatever stress it may be. Your body is just dealing with the stress itself. So I'm not going to ask people to share, but I do want to kind of take a minute and pause and get you to reflect. I may ask one of these questions here just to kind of see some of the responses in the chat for it. But I'm going to read this, and then I'm going to I want you to think for a minute. So I want you to think about a rough financial time in your own life. And again, I'm not asking anybody to share anything at this point. What does that financial stress look like and feel like for you? Because we're each going to respond to these stressors differently. What were things that you did that helped, and what qualities or traits were helpful to keep you resilient? So I want you to kind of spend a minute thinking about a rough financial time in your life. And then if you could share in the chat, let's go to that third, or I guess the second question. What were the things that you did that helped? Let's kind of see what kind of responses we get with things that helped. So think about your rough financial time and remember how that looked and felt like for you, and then share something that you did that helped. Just kind of focus on that for a minute. Focus on the positive side. How did we get through it? Maria, again, spending too much money, she shared there. Trying to make a plan, calling debtors, negotiate down balances, lean on friends and family for support. Yeah, those are all great responses there in the chat box. Again, working with those debtors, trying to come up with a plan to resolve your financial challenges. Definitely a good response there. See if anyone else has a thought before I move on to our next slide. Sometimes it's looking at the resources that you do have. And so whether that would be your savings account, or maybe that would be an asset that you could tie into. Maria focused on the other sides there about being able to reduce your expenses. Those are ways that you could deal with that. So now I want us to transition into this idea of resiliency. And here we have a little definition of resiliency, right? Resiliency is the ability to not only survive, but thrive. And then there at the bottom, you have that in order to remain strong, we must stretch ourselves and spring forward. I like that idea of tying resiliency to this rubber band, right? Because again, you're going to feel stretched, you're going to be pulled, but you have to have that ability to bounce back, and being resilient is that ability to kind of have some flexibility, but yet bounce back. So this is a good introduction to resiliency. And still some more good responses in the chat box about how they dealt with stress. Good stuff there. So here are some characteristics when we sat down and talked about this. What are some characteristics of being resilient or resiliency? And so those things include being adaptable, right? Being able to adjust in your situation, maintaining a positive outlook, so being hopeful and robust. Sometimes you have to be flexible, you know. You may have a plan and anticipate everything's going to work out, but it doesn't. And so you have to be able to be flexible. Communicating with others. That were some ideas we saw in the chat box there. You know, you also have to have this interest in learning, you know, learning and adapting and improving yourself. You have to maintain that social piece, being prepared, to being able to diversify your operations. And then that last one, characteristic, bouncing back and even moving forward. And then we take these characteristics and transition them into skills. So when we transition them into skills, you know, your ability to integrate change, your ability to communicate with other, your ability to take time to organize, to identify and use the resources that are available, to solve problems, to share feelings, show compassion, create meaningful experiences, learn from experiences. All of those things are skills that, you know, you have these characteristics and you transition them into skills. They all build resiliency there. And so, you know, I always like this slide mainly because I like the picture over here, and then you can see the quote there. It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor is it the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to changes. So there's that important element of being adaptable to change. And so, you know, we have some traits there of resilient individuals, which include self-compassion and the belief that one can get through this, you know, as we define it as hardiness. Your sense of self-control, right? That you're still in control of the situation, that versus that lack of control. Having some skills in terms of decision making and managing and problem solving, the ability to ask for help, and again, all that ties back into those. You know, we've said this a couple of times. Those strong social connections. All of those are traits of resilient individuals. And, you know, because when we're talking about farm and farm families, we're talking about the family piece of this as well. And so there are traits that tie along with resilient families. And, you know, I can think my dad had a small business, and I remember back in the 80s when they were, he was experiencing some tough financial times. And I remember him sitting us all down in the living room and just telling us what he was experiencing so that we understood it. And I was pretty young at the time. But, you know, obviously it had enough of an impact on me that I can tell you about it today, right? And so that importance of commitment and togetherness and that connectedness, and in the process of all those things, you have some of these others, right? Maintaining respect, the spiritual belief, having a belief that, you know, you're going to be able to get through this and everything's going to be okay. The cohesion, you know, when a family says we can get through this together, that's kind of an important trait, you know, when it comes to resilience. And also knowing community support. And, you know, it's interesting. You know, I kind of look back on my life, and I was telling you about my dad and his business. Later on, several years, he had an accident on the job and wasn't able to work anymore. And I remember how the community came together. And I kind of feel like I was raised by a community, because once my dad had his accident, he was in the hospital for a period of time and so forth. And so having that community that came together and said, hey, Jesse, we're going to look out for you. We're going to tell you when you're not doing right. We're going to tell you when you're doing good. And so that resiliency as a family can be strengthened through the support of a community. And so now we get into this, how do we build this resilience? And so when you talk about resiliency thinking, it's the ability to anticipate and use stressors to renew and innovate, right? And so some of those abilities include creating realistic plans, being able to reframe problems so that you can look at it and address it and solve it in a different way. And the ability to, again, identify resources, use them effectively, kind of knowing where you can go to seek out new information. So that's one of the things that we try to do as extension educators, is provide information and resources to the agricultural community. And of course, identifying individuals and organizations who can provide that support. So when it comes to financial resilience, there are a couple things that you should be thinking about that can, again, help build financial resilience. And I'm going to introduce these topics here. The next slide, I'm going to talk about, before you're in the situation, and then things you should do after the situation. So when you're talking about financial resilience, and this is from a paper from the Asset Funders Network, and I'll share that later on, or at least the link to that. But you want to have buffers, right? So to build financial resistance, you want to have buffers, which is having that money to set aside already for emergencies. Another way to build resilience is to have that ability to borrow when you need to borrow money. And so that concept of establishing credit along the way, having backstops, having insurance that would address particular challenges you may experience, and then knowing what resources are available. So the benefits concept. So think about the buffers, borrowing, backstops, and benefits when you think about building financial resilience. And let's see what that looks like from a pre, during, and post concept. So when you talk about that buffer, that financial buffer, you have today. So this is what you're dealing with, right? So when you're dealing with a difficult situation, you may need to tap into those savings. And so hopefully when you look at it from a past perspective, that you have a plan to set aside money so that when you experience that stressor, that financial stressor, then you have the ability to have money set aside to pay for that thing, whatever it may be, that stressor that's causing, or that plan to get out of the stress, right? Because sometimes it might not be that you need the money to deal with what you're currently dealing with, but you may need the money to implement a new plan. The other piece is, once you get into the future, right, post the situation, then you need to think about, how do I replenish those savings? So keeping that buffer of money set aside. Another tool would be borrowing, and so when you think about, before you deal with something, before you need to borrow, establishing a good credit, establishing good credit so that when you need the money, you have the ability to get the money. Of course, when you get to whatever you're dealing with on the today side, it's getting that money, right? Going to an institution and being able to access that credit. And then the future piece of it is repaying that credit. So you have the three stages there. Benefits and knowing what's available. Again, that when we're talking about connection, knowing the networks, knowing what's out there before you would experience something, so that when you experience it, now you know where to go to, where to turn to for help. A lot of, I guess a good example was that right now is what COVID funding is out there and available, right? And so if you have in advance, you've developed these networks and know who's out there, who to talk to, where to go for the information, then the situation occurs, then you can apply for the benefits. And then the future piece is, again, following those guidelines. And then the other backstop there is ties into the whole insurance and making sure that you have the insurance you need to protect you when something happens. And so I think crop insurance would be an example of that. I think there's others that we could have there, but you get that, you need to make sure you pay your premiums, and then you need to manage the policy. Earlier I talked about health insurance. Health insurance would be another example. You have that health insurance to pay for those the cost associated with Medicare, but to be able to get that health insurance, you have to, or at least use the health insurance, you have to pay those insurance premiums so that when you make a claim, again, you have the insurance. And then again, making sure that you manage that insurance, going to in-network doctors and so forth can all be part of that, managing it as you move forward. And again, maintaining and continuing to pay your premiums throughout as well. So that's the whole concept of financial buffers, borrowing, benefits, and backstops, and can kind of help create that financial resiliency that we've been talking about. Now I'm going to kind of transition over to Maria, but before I do that, I know Maria's kind of been monitoring the chat. So if there's anything in the chat you feel we need to talk about, feel free. If not, I'm going to turn things over to you, and you can take it from here with the worksheet.
Great. Thank you, Jesse. I'm just curious, what, given this slide and this idea of buffer and borrow and benefits and backstop, what are some of these tools that you're already using, to kind of help build that financial resilience? And you can just put the B word in the chat, or be specific about the kinds of things that you're doing, or maybe if you have ideas on how to save, those kinds of things. What kinds of things are you doing already? Like Bonnie sharing that the COVID relief has been a big help, right? So kind of accessing those resources has helped really all of us kind of cope a little bit better to changes in income and cost of things. Thanks for sharing that, Bonnie. Anybody else? I know sometimes it takes a little time to type things in. Okay, we'll keep typing. We'll keep monitoring that. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, kind of our strengths, right? All of us, within ourselves and within our families have strengths. And so part of being, managing our money and finances resiliently is to sort of think about kind of what are those belief systems that we have for ourselves and with our family and our community, or within our farm family situation, right? What are some of those shared belief systems? What are some of those organizational processes and strategies that we use? And what are some of those communication and problem solving strategies that we use? And sometimes as we're approaching financial stressors, we're so overwhelmed that we're not always able to think about these strengths and how to kind of leverage them in a way that can help us recover and or even bounce forward. And so one of the things I'm going to share with you is kind of a worksheet kind of thing that can kind of help you and maybe, key members of your family or the farm business to really begin to go a little bit deeper around creating solutions for whatever the problem or challenge is. One of the things that I've really learned lately, especially around stress, is oftentimes, as Jesse was saying, we begin to feel it in our body, right? And we may be confused or overwhelmed in our thinking. And that one of the key things that we can do is name it, right? Name, kind of what that feeling is, name what the problem is, or problems, because oftentimes they're, multi-layered, so that then we can begin to kind of take action, right? Because when it stays in that fuzziness and, or in our overwhelmed place, it's really hard to then figure out what's next, or how do I approach this, or even how do I communicate with it. I am one of those people who I can get really overwhelmed. I can't put it into words. Sometimes it takes me a couple days to even put it into words in a way that my family or my partner can understand. And as I sit and ruminate and think about it, I think, okay, well, I'm feeling these 2 or 3 things around this, whatever the issue is. And here's, how it's manifesting and how it's making me stressed out. And here then, I can start to then begin to kind of name it, like, what is it that's causing that stress? So once you get there, right, then you're sort of able to kind of pull on these strengths to help come up with ideas on how to address it. So I'm going to share this slide, and I know you can't read it, but this is managing personal and family challenges resiliently, kind of a worksheet to explore how to use resilient thinking as you kind of tear apart and better understand an issue, and then what are some resources that you can bring to creating solutions. So we're going to go through kind of the different parts of this worksheet, but this is one of the things that Shannon will email out to you, after our program today. All right, so where do we start, right? Well, begin with either, kind of like where do we want to be? Where do I want to be? The dream, right? Or maybe it's starting with the challenge. What is the stressor? And but doing both of these is really important because it helps to begin to help you see sort of the big picture and how the two things are integrated. And so by kind of creating this knowledge, and you're kind of better able to name whatever the issue is, or the challenge, or the dream is, and then that can help you communicate, seek solutions, and help motivate change. So that's the first part of kind of getting organized around whatever the issue or financial challenge might be. I have to go back one, sorry. So the next section has to do with kind of what are our shared belief systems. And so thinking through some of these questions, like, what does this challenge or this dream mean to me, right? Or us, if you're talking about your family or the farm business. Is the challenge a threat or an opportunity? Why and how? So for example, if the farm is not making as much money as you think it should be, right? What does that challenge mean, right? Are you ready to throw up your arms and give up? Are you wanting to, stay motivated to keep the farm going? Is that, is it just a threat, or is it an opportunity? Is there a way to rethink? Is there a way to, restructure a little bit, maybe add some product lines, some value added options. And these are the kinds of conversations you want to have with Shannon, because she's the expert on the farm side. But, what does that mean to us, and how do we want to move forward? And then, what are some of those strengths that myself or the family members can bring to address the challenge? And I think about some of the farms that have been very successful over time in keeping their families part of the farm. And a lot of it has had to do with diversification and allowing kind of some of the newer, younger members to be creative and have some latitude to diversify the operation or just bring their ideas to the table. So what are some of those strengths and energies and knowledges that people can bring to the problem solving and help to support that shared notion of where you want the farm to go? And so there may be some learning that has to do that, and and some motivation for each other that needs to happen. And thinking really strategically about how to become or remain hopeful and optimistic. What shifts in thinking and understanding need to happen? And so, I know this feels very maybe esoteric, like this is not practical, but it's also the thing. I think the way to look at this is these are the things that help connect you to each other and can motivate movement together, right? It brings people to the table and, all eating the same meal, so to speak, right? So, understanding what are those shared beliefs are really important to resilient thinking and planning. All right, so the second part of this thinking is really about understanding the organizational processes and strategies around your challenge or your dream, making your dream come true, right? So it's a little bit about, what are those resources that we need to have, financial and otherwise, and what does moving forward and providing mutual support and teamwork look like, and what are people committed to? And then, who is the community? How do we engage them? How can they help and provide support? And that may be financial support, but it might be, people actually coming to help. It may be all sorts of the kinds of things that can help. And then, of course, thinking about some of those buffers, right? What is the risk management strategies that we can put into place, or maybe even update? And thinking about, kind of, because some of these have to do with finances and some of them don't, right? But what is that financial security and balance that we need to put into place so that our challenges can be addressed effectively? And thinking about who does what and what rules need to be adjusted to help address whatever the challenge is. So thinking about some of those dynamics are really important, and sometimes it means shifting them a little bit, especially as roles change, as kids kind of grow up and want to take on more within the farm, or elder parents are kind of losing their energy and capacity to make decisions, right? All of those things can play to kind of need to be revisited and thought about when it comes to strategies and organizational processes. Okay, and then lastly, a section that really has to do with communication and problem solving. And to me, this is one of the big things, because oftentimes we're sort of in our head trying to problem solve, trying to cope with the stress. And we haven't necessarily shared with say our family members or our farm partners clearly, we haven't shared clearly where we want to go or what needs to happen. And then this is where disagreements can happen, and then that can break down communication even more, right? And so it's really about trying to use good communication strategies so that information is clear, that you're creating environments where people can actually share and talk without judgment or argument, to, learn from previous setbacks, but also do some brainstorming around, what could be different and how do we move forward. And then I think the other thing is, what are the decision-making processes that have to be put in place, right? Because if one person's making all the decisions, even though you've brought everybody to the table, there's a sense of unfairness, right? Um, and maybe that results in a lack of buy-in, right? So we need to be thinking about how our decisions made, who's making them, are there rules around those, and put into place those kinds of rules that are encouraging kind of the family or the farm team to move forward effectively. So all of those things are complex. It's sort of the people part of the farm and the farm family, but are key, right, to helping people move forward in terms of living and managing their farm resiliently. So, kind of the last piece then is really about, what's the plan? What are those small steps that we can take, and who's going to help, and what, what are sort of the processes that you put in place to make sure that things actually get done by the people who are said they're going to do them, right? So I know Shannon and others have probably talked about farm meetings, right? Family meetings, and scheduling those in a way where there is accountability and progress being made, and to keep the farm moving forward. So in identifying those action steps in a concrete sort of way is key, right, to moving things forward and solving problems and addressing challenges. So with that, I want to ask, does anybody have any questions about what I just talked about, or comments about what I just talked about? And, feel free to unmute yourself or type in the chat. Be happy to talk with you about this. Bunch today. So my next question is, now that we've kind of reviewed this tool, think back to that situation you identified before, when Jesse asked you to think about that time that might have been tough. Could you have used some of the questions that are listed on this tool and that I've just reviewed to kind of rethink, relook at that challenge and help you come up with some different kinds of strategies, right? And, as you're thinking about yourself as a resilient individual or a resilient farm family, what are some of the, the shared beliefs or tools that you've used that you can use again and build upon? So one of the other things that we wanted to cover today is sort of some effective coping strategies, right? And thinking about what's in your toolbox. And, you know, tools, right, are designed to do very different kinds of things, right? And so finding the right coping strategy or tool to fit the situation is important, because sometimes situations warrant different kinds of coping tools. And, you know, thinking about what kinds of situations warrant what kind of tool, especially if one isn't working, right? So, you know, I have worked with clients who, you know, are notorious. They just sort of yell at each other, but nothing changes, right? And so that tool, that coping strategy doesn't work, right? Or one person's yelling and the other one's sort of like, I can't deal with this anymore. I'm walking away, right? Those coping strategies aren't necessarily helping them solve that problem, right? So thinking about what's in your toolbox is really important. And so here are some of the things that we've identified, right, that can help manage stress, because stress is part of every day. You know, we deal with it every day. So simple techniques, you know, like taking a deep breath. And by deep breath, it's like meaning using your belly, right? Kind of like filling your belly with air and your chest. You know, it helps slow down your bodily functions in a way that can really help them change up the way your adrenaline, cortisol, and those other hormones that impact bodily functions that cause us to be tense, right? So just doing deep breathing can be a great help, right? And so on this slide, there is kind of this box breathing technique where you inhale and you're inhaling and you're taking 4 seconds to do that inhale, and then you're holding it for 4 seconds, and then you're exhaling for 4 seconds, and then you're kind of um, um, uh, holding it after you've exhaled for 4 seconds. And just that, to do that 3 or 4 times can help really ground you, relax you, and just kind of readjust what's happening in your body as 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 a response to stress, right? So those are important. That's an important skill that I think we often don't even think about, right? And that is something that I know I have done when I have been in stressful situations. And, you know, I've gotten better at saying, you know what, give me a second. I just need to breathe, right? Just give me a second. I need to breathe. And then I can continue to talk to you or address this issue, right? One of the other things I like about that technique is no one needs to know you're doing it. Right? So you can be sitting in a meeting. That's where kind of I am, right? A lot of times sitting in a meeting and I might be feeling stress, and I just start breathing through my belly and doing this technique, and no one knows I'm doing it. But it's a great way to kind of reset yourself. The second one on here is talking about self-talk, and we all do this, you know, whether it's, I was just having this conversation with my mom. She was saying, my mom, right, who's 82, and she said, oh, Maria, I talk to myself all the time. And we were talking about, do we use our name when we talk to ourselves? Like, Maria, you should do, right? You know, kind of how we scold ourselves. And so recognizing that, right? And that isn't always a good thing. And that maybe kind of reframing that self-talk into positive messaging, right? So maybe it's like, I am in control, right? You may have heard of like affirmations, right? Some sort of a sentence that helps you. kind of like ground or reframe where you're thinking, but I'm in control. I am competent. I am capable. I am gonna, take some deep breaths and come at this again, right? Whatever it is, is there a sentence or so that you can rely on to kind of reset yourself and calm your brain, right? And not give in to kind of that negative talk that can be in our head. Just tell that person to be quiet, right? Be quiet, and use different language. Meditating, right? We know from the research that this is an effective tool, and there's different kinds of meditation. You don't have to be dressed in white and sitting on the floor with your legs crossed. There's walking meditations, there's dancing meditations. I mean, just Google it. It's all sorts of interesting strategies for, kind of stepping away, right? Emily before said something about how she planned a little vacation away. Well, meditation can help you do that without even kind of leaving the room, right? Helps you step away from your current situation and help you manage things a little bit better. Exercise is a huge piece. And, many of you may think, oh, well, I'm walking all over the farm all the time. And that's true. Exercise can really, really help. Again, it changes your body physiologically, so you're better able to handle stressors. So if you are getting a lot of exercise, think about doing something that's going to make you happy, right? I don't know, dancing. We were talking about dancing the other day as a tool. Just, put on some happy music and, wiggle around for a little while. That can count as exercise, and it will get you out of your head. Connect with people in your social network. That is so, so important. Humans are social beings, and so to really undo some of that and reconnect us to sort of other people's lives and other things in our life can pull us out of stressful situations or help support us in stressful situations. And, last but not least, really think about, working with a mental health professional. If, you're chronically stressed, if you're chronically depressed, if you're chronically, exhibiting behaviors that are not healthy, it's time to really seek professional help. And I know in Maryland, they've just got this really great project where some telehealth medicine opportunities to connect with mental health providers will soon be coming. So connect back with Shannon on that one, because that will be an important resource. So thinking about, what is one new thing that you may start to do to build your own resilience for yourself, especially financial resilience for yourself. Think about that. Maybe write it down. You don't have to tell us, just write it down. And think about who you can get to support you, right? It's all about that buddy system. Think about who that could be. And or, right, who could you help to be more resilient? How, as I said, we are creatures that need that social support. So make sure you've got those connections made. And so coming back to our rubber bands, right? It's not what happens to you, but what you make out of what happens to make that makes you resilient. So so thinking about how you can bounce, right? Bounce back and adapt is really important. And your frame on that is really important. When it comes to kind of mental health resources, Jesse and a team of folks, we've created these resources. There's one here listed for Delaware, and there's one here listed for Maryland with related QR codes. We each have a website that you can go and look at resources for farm and farm family resilience. And so we share that, and I'm sure, the slides will be shared with you, so you'll have access to this information. Additionally, there's financial resources through these organizations. You can see we've kind of connected in with different extension services, Texas A&M, Virginia, Purdue, Iowa. All of them have developed resources specifically for farms and farm families. And so these resources might be kind of a family budget. It could be some family, managing farm financial stressors. It could be some things around whole farm management, but that kind of looks at that farm and family connection. But these are really great resources that we've curated for you. Encourage you to look for it. And then these are sort of specific stress management and national stress management resources, especially around suicide prevention, crisis hotline, those kinds of things. And so remember, dialing 211 is a great way if you're in a kind of a mental health crisis. Dialing 211 is a great way to get resources there right away, or to connecting to this crisis text line, right? So 741-741, texting there can get you some immediate text help. So now's an opportunity for you to ask any other questions. Jesse and I will be happy to visit with you. And please, unmute yourself or type in the chat any questions that you might have for us. And then here is our contact information if you want to kind of do that offline.
Maria and Jesse, we really appreciate your time and commitment to these webinars. You've done a number of them for us and always just really great information. I love the way you guys teach and provide some reflection and some feedback from the group. So thank you very much. All right.
So glad to be here and happy to visit with anyone who might have some questions. But we're officially done. So
Yes. Well, I'm going to stop the recording.